How do you make a good cylinder? This is Nicholas Torres here, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about how you can make a good cylinder. So, a good cylinder comes down to centering it really well, the opening, and learning how to pull. Those are the three things that you really only need to know when making a cylinder. And why do you want to make a cylinder? Well, a cylinder is the best thing to make out of everything in pottery. Even if you're making a vase, you need a cylinder. If you need a bowl, you pretty much need a cylinder. If you want something very intricate, you need a cylinder. If you want a mug, you need a cylinder. So you need to learn how to make a cylinder. So that's what this video is about, just learning how to make a cylinder. Now, the three things I said were centering, learning to open well, and pulling, learning how to pull. Now let's head on over to the wheel where I'll show you exactly those three steps, and afterwards I'll cut it and show you what a good cylinder should look like.
The first step to making a good cylinder is getting the clay all nice and centered. Without it being centered, you're going to have a very difficult time making your cylinder and pulling up and opening everything else. So you have to make sure that your clay is completely centered before you start doing anything. The next step after centering your clay completely is opening up the clay. Now, I usually like to start with my two thumbs, starting out with a larger amount of clay. If it's a smaller amount of clay, I'll use my two thumbs the whole way down. But two thumbs I start out, and after that I'll go to 3 fingers on my right hand, and I push down until I get about a 1/4 inch on the bottom. In order to check the bottom, you can use a needle tool and poke it at the bottom and place your finger there and see if it's close to about 1/4. After I have my 1/4 inch bottom, I'll then begin to start flattening out the bottom, and after that I start pulling the clay towards myself. And what this does, this allows you to widen the clay enough so that you can put your hand in there and begin the pulling process. Now, before I actually start pulling, I like to do something what's called a pre-pull. And all I'm doing is I brace the outside with my right hand, and I use my inside hand to begin my first pull. Now that I have done that pre-pull, I like to make sure that my clay is nice and moist, and then after that I begin pressing out with my inside hand and pressing in with my outside hand. It's almost like pinching the clay, and you're slowly moving your hands up towards the top of the clay. I always start with my inside hand pushing out before I begin pushing in with my outside hand. This allows you to get a little bump at the bottom and really allows you to get the clay from the bottom. I will also sometimes use both of my hands on the outside and just leave the little bump at the bottom that way. I just compress the clay at the bottom so it makes the bump easier to start pulling up. Now, you just want to repeat the process of pushing out with your inside hand and pushing in with your outside hand until you have the right desired height that you really want. For this one, it took me a little bit to get the height that I wanted, because I know I kept on leaving the top of the cylinder pretty thick, so I kept on having to go back and keep on pulling until I had my desired height. A good trick to know is that you can actually take off the skirt of the clay if you have too much clay at the bottom when you're making your cylinder. And you do that by using a wooden tool, and you press down all the way until you reach the bottom of the wheel head, and then you cut it off. One of the last steps I like to take is, especially for taller cylinders, I will use a wooden rib and I will straighten the cylinder. This makes it easier for me at the end to cut it, and it also, if you're before you're shaping, it helps with shaping as well because it keeps everything nice and steady and even. Now the final step I'm taking right here is I'm cutting my cylinder so I can see how well I pulled up and to see if I made my bottom correct. What I noticed with this cylinder is that I made the bottom a little too thin. So if I were to trim this when it was fully shaped, I would probably poke through because it was too thin. But I noticed that my pulling was nice and even, and that's what you want. You want nice, even consistency all the way up to the top. You don't want it to be uneven in one space and then not even in another. That's just going to make your piece more likely to collapse. So you want it to be nice and even and have a little bit thicker at the bottom because this one is way too thin.